What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to sound off on the Russia versus Ukraine conflict, and more specifically, the accusations of racism and bigotry that have been presented by people of color, especially African people who reside in the Ukraine. But first, before I get into that aspect, I do want to talk briefly about why Russia wants the Ukraine. Because I think some people may be wondering that, why is that? Why, what's the big deal? What's so special about the Ukraine that Russia wants it? And from what I've been told, this is pretty a complex answer to this, and I'll leave some links in the description box below of some videos on YouTube that explain this situation in depth. But before I go any further, right quick, I want to give a brief disclaimer saying that this is ultimately just my thoughts and opinions about this situation. I do not claim to be an expert on Eastern European politics, the former USSR Republic, none of that. I'm simply giving my thoughts and opinions about this situation that is currently unraveling as we speak. All right? But from what I gather, from what I understand, from the videos that I've seen on YouTube, again, the situation is complex, but I'm going to try and just simplify it and then move on to the next topic. So, one, Vladimir Putin, he has expressed desires to rebuild the USSR, the Soviet Union. And for those of you who don't know, the Soviet Union was a superpower for decades at one point. The Soviet Union was originally founded in 1922, and it dissolved in 1991. In fact, very recently, back in December, was the 30th anniversary of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was made up of Russia, Ukraine, and 13 other surrounding countries. And Vladimir Putin has expressed that he would like to rebuild the USSR. Perhaps this is him taking a step in doing that. Also, Vladimir Putin has expressed that he does not want NATO to continue to expand, and he feels that NATO is going to expand to include the Ukraine. And for those of you who don't know about NATO, NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And the organization was formed in about 1949 in response to the aftermath of the World War II. WW2, right? World War II. And pretty much it's a system of security where members of the organization agree to mutually defend each other in response to an attack by an external party or someone who is not a part of the organization. And it was created in part in response to the Cold War as well. And one of the conditions that Putin has for ceasing his onslaught of the Ukraine is that he wants NATO to agree to exclude the Ukraine and every former Soviet Union state from participating in the organization. Essentially, he wants to prevent NATO from expanding east and more east, and including the Ukraine as well as other countries, because it's probably going to end up getting to a point where Russia's going to be the only country that's not in NATO, and they do not have desires to join NATO. And at this moment, the Ukraine is neutral. They haven't joined like NATO. They haven't joined the Russian Federation, at least, not willingly, nor have they joined the Collective Security Treaty Organization, also known as CSTO, either. Another reason is that for Russia wanting to take Ukraine is the positionality of the Ukraine. The Ukraine is it has a good position, like in terms of like strategic and strategy and like military defense and battles. And also, for the majority of Ukraine's history, at least its recorded history, it actually was a part of Russia. It wasn't until fairly recently that it had become its own independent country. And many Russians felt like that was a mistake. Culturally speaking, but also financially speaking, because the Ukraine, it does have a lot of like natural resources like coal, iron, fertile land, a lot of natural gas deposits. And Russia, it does supply a lot of like oil and natural gas. And, because of this conflict, we might actually see an increase in gas prices if we have not already seen that. And also, for Russia to deliver oil to other countries, it often has to go through pipelines that are in the Ukraine, and the Ukrainian government charges them taxes for doing that. But of course, there's much better explanations than I presented. And as I mentioned earlier, there'll be links in the description below to some other videos on YouTube that can explain the situation much better than I can. But I just want to give you like a brief summary of the situation. But now that I've done that, I want to get into the next part of this video, which is the accusations of racism and bigotry in the Ukraine during this conflict. And, it makes me think, are the Ukrainians victims or are they victimizers? Because, we have been seeing, and I'm not sure how well the American media is really covering this aspect of it, but we've been seeing some clips floating around on social media about Ukrainians of color and, Ukrainians who, people in the Ukraine who are of color, especially African people, being discriminated against when it comes to being able to leave the country. Because right now they're pretty much trying to evacuate the country, at least the women and children from the country, and get them to neighboring countries so that they can be safe. But there are officials, who are guarding like buses and trains and perhaps even like, custom points, saying that only Ukrainians, only the Ukrainians, like if you are visibly of color, you will be viewed as not being Ukrainian. Thus, you will not be able to access this particular resource that is available. And honestly, that is a very accurate definition or example rather of what racism is, right? Because I know a lot of times it's like, oh, racism is someone calling you a name, perhaps thinking negatively of you because you are of a certain race or ethnicity. And of course, as many of us know, it goes much deeper than that. And this is an example of that, where someone is actually using, the power and authority that they have and negatively affecting someone's like livelihood or life. They're doing this to Ukrainians who are, well, rather people in the Ukraine who are, black and brown, visibly people of color. So like Africans, Southeast Asians, Middle Eastern people as well. And I know like the situation, I can imagine, is being very frightening for a lot of people. And it's also like more frightening when you have people in charge, like government officials, who are like preventing you from getting to safety. I'm sure that can be very frightening and even traumatizing for some people. And they're doing it on the basis of race. And you also notice some reporters who are reporting on this situation and how emotional that some of them are getting, right? Some of these white Caucasian reporters who are reporting on the situation and talking about, oh, these people are blonde haired, they have blue eyes, they're middle class, they're educated, they're intellectual. They're not like regular refugees, right? And basically, long story short, translation of all that is basically these refugees look like white you and white me. Oh my God, how could this happen to someone who looks like white you and white me? This usually happens to someone that looks like brown them or black them, not white us. And, they have a right when it comes to identifying with people who look like them, as, us black people are identifying with the African people there who look like us, as the brown people are identifying with the brown people there who looks like them, etc. But it should be ideally across the board that we can identify with, atrocities and atrocities of this magnitude, no matter who it happens to. But of course, sadly, that's not the case. And as we can see, sadly, racism does not take a break. It does not take a off day. It does not take a holiday, right? It's raging on as we speak. Even in the midst of a war zone, it's raging on. And something that Trevor Noah brought up, because I had watched like a segment that he did about this situation, about racism and the Russian-Ukraine conflict. And he had mentioned that not too long ago, Syrian refugees were looking for asylum in some of these same countries that a lot of Ukrainians are fleeing to, but they did not allow them in. A lot of those countries did not allow them in. But all of a sudden, these same countries that didn't allow the Syrian refugees in, now they're allowing the Ukrainian refugees in. Again, this didn't happen too long ago. And don't get me wrong, I think it would be terrible if these countries did not allow Ukrainian refugees in. I mean, imagine that if all of these countries just said no to the Ukraine, like, no, we're not going to help you at all. You have to stay where you are. If you come to our country, you will be turned away. You will be attacked. You will be jailed. You are subject to being killed on sight, etc. And, again, that would be terrible if, their neighboring countries did that to them. But, this situation does have me thinking, could this be karma? Could this be karma for the Ukrainian people and perhaps how they treat people of color in their country? Because let's be real, this isn't the first time that racism has come up in the Ukraine, right? I'm pretty sure the black and brown people in the Ukraine could probably tell you a lot of stories about the racism that they have experienced. This is probably just the first time that it has hit like international news. And by the way, it's a side story. It's not the main story. So while the Ukrainians, or at least the government, are victims, they are also victimizers as well. And also, for some of those people out there who love to yell black on black crime, well, this is a big, very big example of white on white crime. So let us take note of that as well. So, white folks got to get themselves together before they come trying to tell black folks how to handle themselves, right? Y'all got to concentrate on that white on white crime. But another thing I want to talk about is the media coverage of Africans in the Ukraine. And it seems like I'm encountering more media coverage of African men in the Ukraine and them giving their stories and testimonies of mistreatment, and not saying that that is not important and that they can't give their testimony, etc., etc. I'm not saying that, but it seems like there is like a lack of African women getting the microphone and getting the camera. Maybe I'm just missing some things. Maybe I'm just not seeing, the videos where that's happening. Not saying that it isn't there at all, but I'm saying that I think more so African men are getting the microphone and the camera. And of course, if you really think about it, this is nothing new, right? We see this happen in the United States when it comes to police brutality victims. Black male police brutality victims get way more media coverage than black female police brutality victims. And very recently have even gotten more justice than black women who are police brutality victims. But that's another video. But I'm sure there are many African women who want to tell their story, but who probably just aren't getting the microphone. And as well, the media, it does have a narrative that it likes to push. Remember, now this may not be in the United States. This narrative, it's not exclusive to the United States, rather. I don't think so. And that narrative is black men, African men who will be considered black men, are victims. And wanting to portray this victim narrative because, let's be real, a lot of non-black people are comfortable with that narrative. It makes them feel safe and secure, even though white people's biggest threat is not black people, it's other white people, as we can clearly see, right? But, that's how the system that they created functions, and that's how it helps to sustain itself. And it's a bit of a sidebar right quick. I did see some footage of like this, of some Ukrainian people helping some Russian soldiers who agreed to, put down their arms and not harm Ukrainian citizens. I did see a little bit of that, just saying. It was like one clip of like a Russian soldier with this Ukrainian woman, and she was giving him something to drink and helping him FaceTime his mom to let his mom know that he's okay. But in terms of African people in the Ukraine, when it comes to at least the men, I'm not sure if the law that they have for the draft applies to them or not, or whether it applies to citizens only, or just all men who are in the Ukraine at this point in time, no matter if you are a citizen or not, that you are going to be forced to fight and to defend the Ukraine. I don't know. And then some people were saying, well, those trains were only for women and children, but they also saw some white men on those trains too. And perhaps those were maybe older white men who were older than 60. Maybe not. Let's be real. Because right now, based on the order that the president, Zelensky, put into place, it's like pretty much men between the ages of 18 and 60 will essentially be forced to fight and defend the Ukraine against Russia. And of course, there are also some Ukrainian women who are helping to defend their country as well, by the way. But I'm not sure about that particular part of the law. Like, does it apply to Ukrainian citizens only who are men? Are all men in the country regardless of citizenship? You know, will it apply to the students who are here, who are in the Ukraine on visas, to tourists? You know, I don't know. And perhaps, you know, I'm not trying to cape, but perhaps maybe some Ukrainian people, especially some officials, may feel like, oh, well, you know, you foreigners can't just come here and mooch off of our system and not put anything back into it or not defend it or anything like that. And they have a right to feel that way. It's their country. But of course, you know, we do have to be careful because we are in a system. And of course, many non-black people, especially white people, don't see black people as being fully human. And because of that, things that are inhumane that happen to black people, to them are okay. But that's pretty much all that I have to say about this situation at this moment. So I thank you very much for watching this video. Please feel free to leave your commentary below. And before I close this video out, I do want to share a video of this young African woman named Jessica, who was in the Ukraine. And the video isn't very long. It's about, you know, between 2.5 to 3 minutes of just her telling her story about being in Ukraine and ultimately getting to safety and what she had to go through. But again, I thank you very much for watching this video. Until the next time, adios and goodbye for now. And I'll leave you with this video.
I was begging. The official literally looked me in my eye and said in his language, only Ukrainians, that's all. That if you are black, you should walk. I'm currently in Debrecen, Hungary. I got in like 10 a.m. today. Today is the 28th of February. It wasn't easy. On Friday at 8 a.m., I was on my way to Poland. I took a commercial taxi and the taxi couldn't stay on the line of cars because literally cars had been there for 2 days. And when we dropped, on the Google map, it was saying a 1 hour walk. And I was like, a 1 hour walk is nothing, you know, if it's getting us there on time. And we walked and it kept increasing. The term walking is traumatizing me. The term walking, I walked for 12 good hours, and it's not an exaggeration. The traffic warden saw me and said I should go to a shelter to sleep, and I slept. And he said the next day that there is a bus going from that shelter straight to the Polish border. And when it was time to get on this bus, The Ukrainians said, just Ukrainians, literally as a black person. I even lied that I was pregnant. They didn't care. I was begging. The official literally looked me in my eye and said in his language, only Ukrainians, that's all. That if you are black, you should walk. And that was an additional 8 hours from where we were. By car, it was like 30 minutes. So we had to walk additional 8 hours. The problem isn't at the Polish border. It is at the Ukrainian border. Because you have to step out at the Ukrainian border to get on the Polish side. And the Ukrainians are only prioritizing their citizens. They don't care. They would push you. They would beat you. If you can make it, you make it. If you don't, you don't. Like, I took a nap and I still felt like I was still walking, like I hadn't crossed over. It's not fair. Like, we're just begging to go. I literally had to go back to my city after that experience, re-strategize, and took a train to Hungary. It wasn't even easy getting to Hungary. We had to pay. Those that didn't have money to pay, what would they do? I couldn't help anybody because I was fighting for my life. It is a traumatizing experience and I don't know where I'm going from now. I literally have to re-strategize in Hungary, try to get my ticket back to Nigeria because it's not safe. This place is not, if your skin is dark, you're at a disadvantage.